Hello everybody. In this video, I'm going to discuss the entryway assignment. So after you've completed the wind turbine experiments, you'll have a good understanding of what you need to do to accomplish this assignment and this activity. So going through the wind turbine experiment, the first experiment taught you all about constructing and building the object with a frame of mind for animation. The second experiment walked you through setting up those different animation clips, which are also states in your animator, and connecting those with transitions and using a parameter to control when that transition happened. In the third experiment, we set up the trigger volume and allowed the player to interact using the E key in that trigger volume to toggle our animation, as well as some sound effects. And then in the fourth experiment was some bonus feedback for the player using animation events to change the color of a button. And as well as a light. So hopefully after that experiment you understand that animation can be used for a number of different things. Any custom function you can come up with, you can call through an animation event. Alright, so that workflow and that concept that you've walked through for the wind turbine, really make sure you understand that going into this assignment and also into level design. Because whether you're animating a wind turbine or a door or a bulldozer or a camera for a cutscene, it's all the same process and same logic, just different game objects that you're talking to. So in the image provided in the assignment, you will see your task is to make an entryway, just like a traditional door that you walk through every single day. That in mind, you don't have to make a exact traditional door. In the image below down here, you will see that looks a little bit more unique, a little bit more custom, something you might see in a game or in a factory or some type of warehouse of some kind, maybe a little bit more futuristic. So if there's some type of entryway you'd like to make for your level design level, feel free to start building that now or get creative with this. Always keep this in scope for the amount of time you have. But you are able to step outside the box if you don't want to just make a traditional door. Most importantly, always find reference for what it is you're trying to make. If you want to make a glass revolving door, go to Google and search for a glass revolving door or a metal frame. Look for the things that you're trying to make, a garage door, for example. Look at some examples. Even if you already have an idea in your head what it looks like, always use reference to try and recreate it as best as possible. So in this video, I'm just going to go through the assignment and break down the requirements and the recommended workflow for completing this activity to give you the best level of success. So the things that you're going to need in terms of construction for this assignment, first is a frame. Some type of stationary static part of your prefab that isn't moving when the door is animated. So oftentimes I see this getting confused with the actual wall that the door is attached to, but keep in mind a door is actually hinging and attached to the frame, and the frame is then mounted in the wall. We want to make this prefab easy and ready to use and being able to just drop into our level, and we can build the wall geometry around that. That's a separate object. So definitely understand that is a part of the requirement. Think of the frame and that part of housing as how this door functions and how it actually works. Avoid just taking geometry and pushing it into things and sliding and pushing objects into each other. Try to think of these as actual solid objects and how they would function and work if this were to exist in real life. The next requirement that you're going to need is a handle of some kind. And here you can see in parentheses we have a visible interaction point for players. And that's what we're going for here, is something that is clearly apparent to the player that, hey, I can walk up to this and interact. We don't want to focus on relying on text on screen or telling the player through a voiceover, looks like I can go through that door. Right? We want to give them a natural visual right in the level. Just like we did in our control station in ILA 4, we made that big red button that controlled our wind turbine. Just by looking at that button visually, it looks like something the player can interact with. So think about what you can do for your button, or for your handle or your interaction point, and try and make it intuitive for the player. Here you can see the handle on this door, as well as down below in the second image, the button next to the circular door. So some type of interaction point. It could be a lever, a switch, a button, a handle, a chain, anything you can come up with. Just make it clear to the player that that's what you interact with. Next up is a pivot point, right? Some type of rotation. So we definitely recommend having your door on a hinge of some kind, but something in your door must rotate. And the reason why is that forces you to think about setting up your hierarchy correctly and setting up your pivot points in the correct place, using empty game objects as that pivot point to rotate multiple objects around one position. It really forces you to think about certain ways and forces you to think about your hierarchy when you have something rotate. So if you wanted to make a sliding door of some kind that's still not out of the possibilities, have something rotating a part of the door itself. Maybe there's a center locking mechanism that rotates first and then the door slides out of the way. All right, so those are the requirements for construction. Going down, reading through this right down here. So setting up your scene, this should be the exact same process you've gone through for your control station, your wind turbine part 1, your wind turbine part 2, of just working with your scene, right? Make sure you're using Perforce while you're working on this assignment. So check out your IND2 experiment scene, work on it while you're building your door, and then submit your changes to the depot every so often, right? Make sure you're having that backup of your work in place, right? We'll be using the scraps intro scene in your hierarchy, so make sure that that's loaded in. You don't want to add your character or anything else to the experiments scene itself, but just you're going to have your scraps intro scene loaded and then additively load your IND2 experiment scene. That should be the same process that you've gone through in your ILA activities. All right, so the requirements, we are going to be making an exported Windows build. So by the end of this, when you're all finished, you're going to export a build and replace the build on the depot the same way you've done at the end of project setup, control station, and the wind turbine, the final wind turbine where you made that build. So make sure you understand that process. Make sure you give yourself time to make the build. Don't wait until the last 15 minutes before the assignment's due to make the build and test it. Give yourself time to troubleshoot, expect things to go wrong, and then you can fix them and have plenty of time to interact, or plenty of time to make those changes. So that being said, right, it has to be in a build. The player should be able to interact with the entryway pressing the E key. The door should start closed, animate to the open state, and it should stay open. The player can press E again, and the door will close and stay closed. And when the door is open, the player can pass back and through multiple times, right? We've created this loop to allow the player to open and close the door infinitely. So even if you wanted to make a door, we have a door like this or something where you want the player to walk through it, and then in your level it shuts behind them and they can't get back through. For this assignment, just create that loop where they can open and close it multiple times, and then when you get to level design, you can adjust your door to make it work exactly how you want for your level. All right, also make sure your door is playing 2 sounds. This you can reference back into ILA 3, or I'm sorry, Wind Turbine Experiment 3. You can go back and check out how we used one audio source to play 2 different clips. That's what I want to see with your door, actually making one sound for opening and a different sound for closing. If you want your interaction point, like your button or your lever to make a separate sound effect, that's totally okay, but make sure the door itself is playing 2 different sounds. All right, so down below the requirements here is this workflow section, and I highly recommend everyone following with this. You're going to see this is the exact same thing you did for the wind turbine, where you have your entryway, we have the construction, we make our prefab, from there we put on our animations, we set up the interaction with our trigger, and then you'll have your bonus. Basically the 4th step you guys will include is putting on materials and textures. But that's the same process we went through with our wind turbine, right? So first, focus on construction. Again, you want to make sure there's some type of hinge or rotation. You have a frame and a clear interaction point. And I highly recommend everyone putting the interaction point on both sides of the door. So you can duplicate your trigger and have it on both sides once you get to the interaction point, but allow it to be interacted with on both sides. All right, all of your entryway parts should be textured. You can use this website, textures.com. It's a fantastic resource, so you can go ahead and sign in. And how it works is you will get 15 credits per day. So I'll go to log in, and all you need is a username, password, and an email. You don't have to put in any credit card information or anything like that. It's completely free to use. It's a royalty-free site, and you'll see they have tons and tons of different textures for you to choose from. So say you're looking for, they even have some door textures if you want to put those and apply those right to your specific door itself. But say you want to find, we have metal, then from there they've got all subcategories. And how it works is you get 15 credits per day. So if I go to download a texture, right, you'll notice that this texture is 1 credit, right? So one credit right there to download. I'll download that and it will remove it from my credits. They don't roll over and build up, but 15 credits per day is still a great number that you get access to. So be sure to go through and download some textures that you like, as well as start building that texture library for yourself. They do even go further if you're really into, if you have any background in art or you're into looking into this more, they have the substances where you can download the albedo, which is the color. They have a height map. They have a normal map, which is what gives that illusion of depth. They have the roughness map and the ambient occlusion. You'll see those channels in your materials right in Unity, but then you'll see that this will give an effect to your material and not just have the flat color. So these are more expensive with your credits. You'll start to use up your credits a lot faster, but they can combine to make a very detailed material. So things you might want to look out for and talk to your team about when you get to Project and Portfolio 3, thinking about how you can use those materials to push your level to that visual level of polish. All right, this should be very straightforward, but don't forget you should have solid collision on your entryway. So if I can just walk through the door, it really defeats the purpose of having the entryway there, right? Make sure your entryway has collision and the player can't just walk through. They have to interact with the entryway, and the colliders are appropriate. All right, so if you're having any trouble with construction, I really recommend this diagram, and this is really good for everyone to check out. This could really showcase how you can have multiple animated objects in one animator. And we set this up in our wind turbine. You may not have caught on to it, but we had that game object called Turbine Animator, and our animated pieces were inside of that. So let's just go through this really quickly. All right, so this game object up top here, I've tried to make this look as much like what you would visually see in the hierarchy in Unity. So what I have ego for short is just an empty game object. That's what that's referring to. All right, so an empty game object here, this is our prefab. It's going to hold 2 other empty game objects. One is going to be the frame, and one is going to be the animator. This one called animator is actually going to have our animation controller component attached to it, right? We're just going to have that controller. It's just going to be an empty game object. So inside of our frame, we're going to put all of the geometry objects that make up our frame, right? So say we have a top piece, we have the 2 side pieces, maybe we have a little kick plate on the bottom, or we add in a door jamb or other little pieces, right? You can make your frame as detailed as possible. All of the objects that you don't want to move during your animation will go inside of the frame. And by setting this up, so this is an empty game object here, and our animator is an empty game object, this allows for complete customization at any point. So say you're making a door and you realize, oh, I want a window inside of my door. I want to put bars on the outside of the door. I want to change it how it visually looks, but it's already been animated. This system will allow you to change your geometry without having to rework your animations. All right, so that's the frame part. These are going to be the static pieces. You'll notice here when we move the prefab around, the frame and the animator are going to move with it because those are children objects. So now if we look inside of the animator, let's break this down even further. We have another empty game object, and this is going to be the hinge object, right? This is just going to be the location of where that hinge is actually located. So if you have where you want the door to rotate or pivot from, you're going to move the hinge to that location and then make it a child of the animator, right? This is what you're actually going to rotate to open and close the door. All right, so inside of our hinge, we're going to have a child of the door geometry, right? So this, on a very low level, this could be a cube that we rotate, right there, that's moving alongside of our empty game object as we rotate this. but this could be made up of any number of objects. But as we rotate the hinge door, right, everything's going to move with it. All right. The other child that we have as a part of the hinge door is the handle. Right. In this game object, what this is going to allow us to do is have a multiple animated objects. Right. So we can rotate our handle, which will be the geometry as a child of this empty game object, and that is going to be animated and rotate separately from the hinge door, right? But as you notice, when we open up the door, the handle is going to move with it. So this is going to allow for the handle to be animated independently, but also work in conjunction with the door itself. Okay? So this system is set up and works as is because remember, our animator right here, this is the parent that has the animation controller. Anything that has the controller, remember you have access to all of its children when you're animating. So by setting up multiple game objects inside of here, we get access to both of these and we're able to animate those specific objects or any number of objects that are children to our animator. All right, so use that as a reference. I really like to see multiple animated objects in your entryway. So if you have a traditional door, try to push yourself to have the handle rotate and then the door open up. And that can be done in all one animator and not multiple separate animator components. Okay, so after you've created the object, right? You've built your game object. You've named all the pieces how you want them to be named. Then you want to create your prefab. I see students making this mistake pretty often, and it can cause some rework, right? And it causes frustration when you have to redo something you've already done before. So make sure after you've built it and before you put your animations on it, you create the prefab. Make the prefab, put it in your IND2 entryway folder, right? So inside your assets, you have your IND2 folder, and then you have your entryway folder. Put the prefab and your FBX inside of there, as well as everything else you're going to be making for this activity. All right, this is also a good time to submit to Perforce, right? Think about this is experiment 1, here's experiment 2, and then we have experiment 3. So at the end of each one of these, submit to Perforce. I want to see updates to Perforce throughout you working on this activity and not just one submission at the very end. Right, this is just starting to help us build workflow and establish working with Perforce and getting comfortable with that tool and not avoiding it. Right, it's going to be a big help. It's not there to cause problems. All right, so then the animation, right? So the door should be able to animate open, stays open, and then the door closes and stays closed. It should look seamless between them. So as long as it's not wiggling and popping, or there's some weird hiccups within the animation, you'll get credit for that. I'm not expecting you guys to be animators. I'm not expecting everyone to make perfect animations. But if you see any weird wiggles, you see anything wrong, go and adjust the graph. Make sure your graph is smooth and your curves look correct and there's not any duplicate keyframes anywhere. Also make sure those clips and the animator that you create, those get put into that entryway folder, and then we add those to the depot. All right, moving into the interaction, make sure all the interactions are using the E key. So don't open the door when the player enters a trigger or exits a trigger. That can come in level design or specific for your level. Just make your interactions on the E key. Make sure it's a fairly realistic distance. So you don't want the player to start the level and press E and the door opens from way across the level. It seems obvious, but it happens a lot, right? So make sure you're using that tag of the player, right? Checking to see if the player's in the volume. In the wind turbine, we use a boolean called isHere, and if isHere is true and they press the E key, then we move forward and changed our parameter. So make sure it's within a decent distance to your interaction point. And then the opening and closing interactions, those animations should play 2 different sound effects. Make sure you're using, I guess you don't have to use this website. Feel free to use YouTube or anywhere else. Also, a great resource for sound effects is your mouth. So if you have any specific sound effects you want to make, feel free to just record yourself making a noise and use that for now. Again, just like the animations, I'm not expecting you to be audio engineers, but it's really great to add in your own sound effects from time to time. All right, so you can go to Westar Music, and when you can go to log in, you'll see we have the login information's down here for you, library@fullsail.com, and the password's fullsail1234. So you can go ahead and log in. You don't have to make an account, or you don't have to pay for anything on this site. So once you're logged in, you can go over to sound effects, and then you can either search for specifically what you're looking for. So if I just type in door, you'll see I've got over 22,000 sound effects right here to choose from. So I can go ahead and you can click on these play buttons to preview them before you download them, just to get a sense of what that sound actually sounds like. All right, and then if you find something you like, you can use this download here to download the WAV file. WAV or MP3 is fine. You'll see the WAV will probably be, is most often, better quality because you see it's slightly larger in size. But either the WAV or MP3 work well with Unity. Also worth mentioning, I'm not expecting anyone, I'm not requiring this to be used, but definitely worth mentioning is Audacity is a free tool that you can utilize as a designer that will allow you to just edit and adjust audio clips. So if you find a clip like the one that I just found right here, this sliding door, see how there's this long pause of not much audio happening? There's really no sound effect in this spot. You can bring that into Audacity and trim and clip your file pretty easily. So I like to call it the Microsoft Paint of audio editing. So it's pretty easy to use, not too complicated. It doesn't offer a ton of different options, but it offers enough to trim and cut audio files down to a bit shorter. All right. Okay, so at the end of it, and definitely I encourage you to take what you learned from Experiment 4 with the animation events to add in animation events of your own. So if you want to have lights blinking, or you want to have things changing color at different points of your animation, or have sounds play at certain points in the animation events are great ways to utilize that. So if you find anything you want to challenge yourself, add in an animation event, and that will definitely do well for you on the overall assignment. So then definitely make sure you're not missing this step. Make sure you're adding all of your scripts, sound effects, materials, textures, the prefab, everything to that Entryway folder, as well as updating your IND2 experiment scene. All right, so this image down here can just give you a sense of what is possible, some things that you can do now that you understand these states. So these 4 states down here, open, opened, closed, and closing, those are what you're going to be using throughout the actual assignment, right? These 4 states, this cycle. But you can see in here we can add in a bunch of different states. So here we have locked and unlocked. This creates this additional 2 states, right, to pretty much just check for a different parameter. So this can just kind of show you what you can do and how you can make more complex interactions based on understanding these states and the transitions. All right. Afterwards, once you're all finished and everything's updated on Perforce, make sure you replace the compiled build on the depot. So here is the exact same instructions that you've seen before, where you'll take your build and mark it for delete. Double check your build settings to make sure your experiment scene is below the level scenes, below this scene in number 5, and then make sure you disable the scraps end. All right, and there's a shot of what the exact order your build settings should be in. And this will walk you through exactly, compiling another build, testing it. Make sure you test your build. Remember, this is 25% of your grade. You don't want to just submit something without actually opening it up. So you can go ahead and test the build, add it to the depot, and then write in the description of submission for Entryway assignment. Right? You can see the instruction, the changeless description right there that you can use. That way I know that specific revision is the one that you want graded. Okay, and then lastly, this is a huge step that I encourage you guys to do for this assignment in level design, in PMP3, in game design 2, in all of your final project classes, and also when you're out in the industry, is test what you just submitted to the depot. Right? And really make sure that what's on the depot works and nothing got messed up or no files got missed when you added your files to the depot. So to do this, you can show your folder in Explorer, right? So it will pop up this Explorer window right here, and all I'm going to do is get this folder right here, this Andrew O'Connor folder, and just delete it from my workspace, right? Not mark it for delete, don't actually delete it from the depot, but just delete it from my workspace so I don't have it on my computer anymore. Then in the depot, you can right-click on that folder and do the get revision ... right? Not get latest revision, but get revision ... And we're going to use the force operation. So right now, Perforce thinks I have that whole folder already, but I don't, right? Because I deleted it from my computer. So hit force operation, and that will copy those files back to your computer, and now you can test the executable one more time. And just as a tip, don't open the executable through Perforce. It won't load the scraps INI file correctly. So always show in Explorer and then double click on your executable from there. All right. At the bottom of the assignment, you'll see your showstoppers. So make sure that the data folder and executable are submitted. Right. Make sure that those are submitted. If you don't submit your data folder, I can't actually open your executable. Right? If your entryway doesn't animate, this is also going to be an issue. Right? You got to make sure the door's animating as well as it interacts with the E key. Okay? So double check your build, playtest your build. You can avoid all of these showstoppers, and then also review the rubric. You'll see that everything's broken down. We're not trying to hide anything from you. You can see 10 points for submission, to where if you correctly submitted the executable into a single folder. All right, this is for your working folder. If you actually submitted your experiment assets, like the actual asset files to make your entryway, so your animations, textures, materials, audio clips, and all the scripts that you made go into your entryway folder, and then broken down to construction, the animation, and the interaction. So definitely be sure to read through that rubric and reach out to your instructor if you have any questions.